Welcome to the Education Insights Focus on Behavior podcast. We're here to talk about all things behavior in the world of education. We take the science of behavior and break it down for educators into easily implementable steps, and we're excited to spend some time with you. Get ready to talk through behavior, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can all improve our work in schools so we as educators can be more fulfilled and our students can be more successful.
Welcome back to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and I'm excited to be here with my co-host today, Daniel Irwin. Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
And Dr. Daria Lorio Barston. Hey, Daria.
Hi, everyone. Hi.
And we are always happy to have our producer, Emily Muse. Hey, Emily.
Hello.
So I want to get us started today by having kind of a joyful trot down memory lane. So Daniel and Daria, I want you to think about who is one of your favorite students that you've ever worked with and why?
There's a lot, honestly.
There's always a lot, but you
There's a
just have to
lot.
pick one.
If I had to pick one, it would be a student I worked with pretty early in my career. I want to say it was like as I was getting my teaching license, as I was getting my BCABA. Like it was a while back. It was a long time ago. But this student, I was in a private day at the time, came to us with some really pretty significant self-injurious behaviors. And at the time, he was 6 or 7, and was not successful in his home school, and ended up coming to us. And it was really the first time that I had a student with that level of interfering and challenging dangerous behavior, because it was self-injurious, it was aggressive, and it was such a well, it was a couple of things. One, it was an incredible learning opportunity to understand sort of the multifaceted approach to helping students through those challenging behaviors. But it was also just such a good, again, a learning opportunity to I feel like I was very close with this student. We developed, here it comes, that relationship. And, over time, the vast majority of those interactions are super positive and preferred, and becoming a preferred person or instructor for a kid, or, that person they're kind of seeking out, and having fun with them, but also really pinpointing and working hard to eliminate some of those really challenging behaviors for him. It was just such a shift in my understanding of behavior, and sort of it kind of locked me in for wanting to do this as a career, just because there was a lot of growth, and again, the relationship, and just really it was a pivotal moment for me professionally.
So, Daniel, I agree. This is really hard to pick just one, right? Especially when you love this profession and when you love teaching as much as I do. I'm like, well, all of them are my favorite in their own way. But the one that comes to mind, and I should preface this with saying, I definitely have a very soft spot in my heart for the mischievous kiddos and the kids who don't always love the school system as a whole, but sure do love finding the loopholes in the system. And so,
Not self-reflective at all, Daria.
because I'm just saying,
Birds of a feather.
yeah, I think there's a reason why we like many of the kids that we naturally kind of gravitate and love to. But this particular kiddo, had a really rough start in the educational system, like to the point that had talked his family into trying homeschool for a little bit, and was just did not have a good impression until came to me in 5th grade. And we had a delightful time together, because I think I was not quite the teacher that he expected. As far as, unfortunately, leading up to me, he has had teachers who kind of took the position of because I said so type of teacher. And that did not mesh well with his sense of identity, really. And so we had a very different journey, and I really loved all the pieces. At one point of time, previously, when we talked about reinforcement, right, and like your attention being a reinforcer for some of the students, we had to start a joke journal because I really appreciated this kiddo's sense of humor, but we finally had to have a conversation of like, this is really reinforcing to me during the lessons, but I worry that sometimes the instructional control gets a little bit muddied with all these like joke journeys we take. So we pivoted to have the student during my lessons would engage in lessons and also write jokes with like a timestamp. Like at this point of time in class, this is what I wanted to say, but instead I wrote it down. And then I would read this journal at the end of the day and I would write like responses in this. And this was my favorite correspondence ever because it met the need of him sharing the jokes. It still was super reinforcing to me. He still got my attention, but all the other classmates didn't have to suffer through that. So I think it was finding ways and problem solving together to make sure that he was successful in the school system when um, when he had some rough experiences before. So that one definitely still holds a very, very special spot in my heart. And I loved most of all, in fact, one of my greatest accomplishments as a teacher was the year after I taught this child. The last day of school has always been emotional because I would always turn into a softie when I would put my kids on the buses and they would go off to middle school and, I might have gotten teared up. So the year that was after the year that I taught him, this child showed up with his mom at the school holding a puppy for me to pet the puppy because he said to his mom, "Oh gosh, Miss Florio is gonna get really tearful on the last day of school, and let's bring her a puppy to pet. It'll make her feel better." And so that has really stuck with me because I don't know many other middle schoolers who had started as being labeled the troublemaker, who would come and be so thoughtful to try to express empathy for an adult teacher who probably should have held it together when the kids' buses pulled off. So that one stuck with me because it was a fun journey for us.
Those are both really great stories. And I do think um, it is not unusual for kids that I don't know how to say this exactly, but like kids that pose a challenge or pose, a situation where there has to be solution finding that occurs. I think sometimes those are the kids that stick with us the most. Um, Mine is not quite as inspiring, but I will never forget this child as long as I live. He was so sweet. He was 2 going on 3. I was working in a preschool at the time, and we were teaching him how to talk, and he was, learning all his vocabulary and all these things. And we had some struggles getting going. And then all of a sudden, he kind of somehow we fell into the fact that he really liked knock knock jokes. And so he would love to like hear these knock knock jokes and he would laugh. And I don't honestly know if he actually understood the punchlines as a 3-year-old may or may not fully understand those things sometimes. But his favorite one, he learned to say on his own. And it was so cute because he would come up to you and be like, knock, knock. And of course, you would have to say who's there because you can't not say that to a 3-year-old. And he would say then boo. So then you'd have to say boo hoo. And he'd be like, don't cry. And he was so cute when he would say it. And it just stuck with me forever. He's in his 20s now and an adult and probably has moved on to fabulous things. But for the rest of my life, he will stick with me. So I appreciate you all sharing that. And I think sometimes it's kind of fun to reminisce about the kids that we've worked with. And you're right, it is really hard to pick just one because for every kid I've worked with that I hope that I've touched their lives, they have absolutely touched mine. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people who work in education. I've learned more from the kids that I've worked with than they may have ever learned from me. So, um, but that also kind of brings me into the as great as it is that there's those kids that we remember because of all the warm fuzzies that we get. I think sometimes there's always that one kid, and that's actually the title of today's episode is There's Always That One Kid. And I put that one kid in air quotes. And we're going to delve into what we mean by that. So as we're talking about this, and we've all worked in consultative roles, what happens when you get called into a classroom because there's a child who's displaying some kind of interfering behavior that's getting in the way of the classroom learning?
So I have to say, I don't love hearing that phrase because that phrase generally carries connotations that are one hop and skip away from deficit-based thinking, right? It's usually when people are talking about that one kid, usually it is so value laden, and usually they are so frustrated and feel like they have tried problem solving and nothing has worked. And this is the kiddo that's going to make them quit their career, right? And so it's always really tricky because I have to gently remind ourselves that the kids show up to schools the very best selves that they are, right? Whatever learning histories that bring, whatever life experiences they come with, they are who they are, and it's not like the families are keeping their best kids at home, right? Like they're sending us the best kids that they have. So I think we have to be careful sometimes with how we describe the behaviors of the students that sometimes are presenting opportunities for us to hone in our craft and to learn how to be a better teacher for kids that may be a little bit more challenging for us in comparison than others. Um, but I think when I encounter this in the field, as I mentioned, usually it involves a student who engages in behavior that's outside of the learning and the application that the teachers have at that moment. And when they're a little bit unsure what to do for the student to be successful in the classroom and what to do for them as educators to feel successful in the classroom as well.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And there's obviously no intent in how we've labeled this. I think this is just more um it's just more representative of, I think, a lot of times what we hear. I know a lot of times when I go into classrooms, teachers, to your point, they've tried what they know and they're doing the best they can, but they don't know how to move forward from where they are. And I think there is a frustration of, if I could just get rid of this one kid, my classroom would work so much better. And I think I understand. I mean, I definitely understand that feeling, but I also would argue getting rid of that one kid, as I'm using air quotes, is not actually going to resolve all the issues or the challenges that might be going on.
Well, and that's the thing, right? It's never that one kid because sometimes it indicates this is a challenge that I haven't encountered before and I don't know what to do with it. But there will always be another kid and another kid and another kid that presents plenty of opportunities for us to become better teachers, right? We're going to encounter things that we haven't encountered before. And I think that sometimes and I know, Selena, what you mean when you say this, and I know how we mean this when we talk about this, right? And like the air quotes around those wording. But I think sometimes it's really easy for people to fall into the trap of labeling a kiddo as a problem, as opposed to labeling the behavior or labeling the contingencies in place, which is a problem, which then is also an issue because then it makes it sound unintentionally, right? That the problem is outside of our locus of control, and we don't really know what to do because it's that one kid. Whereas in reality, it's more, well, let's investigate, let's unpack what is it about the student, what is it about the interactions, what are the actual behaviors, how do we operationally define them, how do we unpack that ABC contingency. That's a much better conversation to have so that we can actually engage and utilize the strategies that we know how to utilize to get to a better outcomes for everybody involved, right? For the student and for the teachers and for the peers who are also watching all sorts of things. And I think we have to be mindful because sometimes when we think those things, and I mean, we all are people. We all have students and behaviors that we love seeing, and some maybe not so much, right? Like some kids make us really work on loving the behaviors that we're seeing. But I do think we have to be careful with even thinking about what is the actual problem? What is it that bothers me so much about the behavior that I'm seeing from the kiddo?
Yeah, I think that that sort of self-reflection around why is this so important to me in this moment, sort of this idea of this is really getting to me. And I think a lot of times it's, Selena kind of mentioned that largely even experienced educators most have been very successful in a variety of classroom settings with hundreds of students, and there's these offshoots of things or students that might have been more challenging, or those that, there's obviously a continuum there. But I think there's a number of things that are factors in that. And one is that sort of that big discrepancy between sort of the expected and what 90% of the kids in class are doing, and how they're communicating, and how they're sort of moving through their day. And the larger that discrepancy gets, the harder it is to separate the behavior from the child, or not separate, to sort of look at the behavior as behavior and something we can control, as opposed to something that's like intrinsic to the kid, right? And so especially when there's communication challenges and that kind of thing, where it's just more difficult to get some of that information. Given that, and thinking about, the history, and I've done the things that I know how to do, one of the big parts of coaching is helping people kind of reflect and think and say the things that they're likely already thinking. I found that that's a really valuable tool or strategy to sort of get at that. Well, why do we think it's happening, right? Well, he doesn't want to do the work, or he doesn't want to have to answer my questions, or he wants to do whatever he wants to do. And sort of getting those conversations going and asking some of those questions can at least get teachers to sort of that point, or IAs or administrators or whoever, that sort of point of, okay, this is a behavior, and we can work on this behavior. We can help this kid by helping reduce the behavior. And I think when you can use language like that, that draws the distinction between the behavior and the student, right? And this is what we're going to work on. This is within our circle of control or locus of control, things we can do something about. You can kind of get that buy-in, because you're starting a process. You're starting problem solving. You're starting something that doesn't feel this big. That is, he's whining, he's crying, he's falling on the floor. I can list 30 things that this student does, and it's a challenge to me, and it's a challenge to everybody else. When you start asking that why question, then you start getting at fewer answers and more opportunities to change what we're doing, or to modify, or to support whatever. So yes, I think exactly what you said, Daria.
Well, and I think there is so much power in separating the individual from their behavior, right? So separating the kid from, this is the behavior that's a challenge. And then I think closely followed by that, it's helpful for folks to reflect on thinking about, okay, well, what are my top 3 behaviors? If I had to choose one behavior that I can change, or if I had to focus on one behavior that just gets under my skin so much that it escalates my own emotional state and I just can't take it in the classroom, right? Like, what are those concrete, specific things? And then we can unpack, and then we can figure out what are the actual behaviors, what does that look like, what does that sound like, that we can utilize the strategies, and then we can start shaping. And chances are, usually in the descriptions of a student like that, there's a very long list of all the things that we would like to change, all the behaviors we'd like to change. But I think helping folks start with some specific ones and keeping it to a fairly short number of things that, okay, these are the things that we can target now. And then hopefully, as you are seeing progress, right, then that helps somewhat. And I also think it's really, really important to pair that with other, here we go, Daniel, just for you, relationship building opportunities. Because sometimes we start seeing students as their behavior and we forget other aspects, right? I think about like the 2x10 strategy, where when you know that you're not super connected with a kiddo, you have to actively work at it. You have to find other things. You have to find other aspects that while you are embarking on the shaping of the behavior journey, at the same time, you're trying to build the rapport. You're still continuing to show up for the kid, to communicate, hey, this is going to be a rough journey for both of us, but we are in it still together.
Yeah, in talking, you mentioned those relationships, and I think the I'm Determined Project one pager does such a good job of like identifying, or at least helping provide some language around identifying what those things are. And I think it does. The I'm Determined Project is a Virginia project. It's available nationwide on their website. Emily will throw a link in the chat. It's a wonderful project that focuses on self-determination and student independence and all of that. The one pager is, I think, is a great class-wide tool, to be honest with you, that looks at strengths, preferences, interests, and needs, right? And so when we're in an IEP meeting and we're talking about accommodations and we're talking about specially designed instruction, it all feels very, well, it's legal, right? Like you have to write it in a legal way. When you're having conversations with families or you're having conversations with students, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs are things we all have. And so it's an opportunity to share those things and to make it just a part of life and what it is we do, and that we all have things we're good at and we all have things we need to help us be successful. And so it's important for the teacher to do that too, to model that. Yeah, I need my calendar every day to keep me organized, or I need to make sure that I have, these things written down or else I forget to do them. Or I set a timer to remind myself that we've got to go to music in 15 minutes. Like whatever it is, we all have needs. We all have things that we do that support us, that we might look for help from someone else, in a way that's very connected to the person, not necessarily just the person's education. Does that make sense? It's very nice.
Well, and Daniel, since you mentioned Determined Project, they have actually a lot of really, really great tools, and one pager is one phenomenal one. It's a great starting point. The other one that I love for the very same reason, it's called the Good Day Plan, where the student has to reflect on, what does a good day look like for me? Is it happening now? Who can help me with that? And I think particularly when we get stuck in the pattern of repeatedly not experiencing success with a student in the classroom, I think sometimes those conversations bring us back to the actual dynamic of, this is a student that I'm supposed to figure out how to meet their needs, right? We are part of the same learning community. And so unpacking some of those conversations gives a student an opportunity to also share their perspective. And sometimes that helps kind of get to the root cause as to, well, why am I seeing what I'm seeing, right? So you get a depth of information and you get the student's perspective, which is really essential in when you're trying to problem solve. Because I think another trap that people fall into when we are trying to figure out what to do with a particular student is finding solution and doing things to them rather than with them. And I think that the more we can invite the student to be part of the problem solving, or at least capture some of the voice, the more likely we are to get to a much better place as our solutions go, and as whether it is a behavior plan goes or whatever it is that we might be working on. So I think whether you use that kind of structure, whether you do a conversation of just, hey, help me understand how is school going for you, all of those things I think are a really important part of problem solving together.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm hearing, and I totally agree with, behavior, when students are engaging in interfering behavior, it can feel very personal, right? No one wants to be hit, kicked, bit, spit on. I mean, we've all had those experiences and they're not fun. I think we need to remember they're probably not fun for the student either. And it probably isn't as personal as it feels like in the moment, right? Like that student may be engaging in that behavior not because Daniel is Daniel, but because Daniel seems to be the individual standing in the way of that student accessing what they want, or that student being able to get away from something that they don't want to do. And so if we can be a little more systematic and try to analyze it a little less personally, I think that's only beneficial to everyone involved, right? And that's where that science of behavior that we've talked about before comes in it feels personal, and I don't want to dismiss those feelings, but if we can take a step back, remember we're the adult, how can we help make this situation better and look at it in a more kind of systematic step-by-step process? I think that can just help de-escalate our own response to whatever that interfering behavior might be.
So earlier in the conversation, we talked about kind of the idea of separating the behavior from the student, right? Like it's there, but it's not who they are. And I think to your point, Selena, it's the inverse. When we're looking at students' behavior towards us, or what seemingly is towards us, it really is sometimes toward our behavior, right? And so how are we going to change our behavior so that that student no longer feels the need to do such a thing? So again, it's not toward us necessarily. There's a function to it, and sometimes we're the vessel that is going to accept and not accept, but be sort of the target maybe sometimes for some of those behaviors. But if we look at it the same way we would look at a student's behavior, here's some things that we can start controlling, then that comes back to us to how can we adjust our own behavior to meet the student where they are, right? And so I think that can help with that internalizing and that internalizing or letting challenging behaviors from a student damage the relationship on our end.
To kind of drive that point home, like one of the things I'm kind of reminded of is we've probably all had this experience where something happens and you have to call a customer service representative. And how that interaction goes very much depends on that customer service representative's attitude and behavior, right? If I call and I'm like, there's a problem, I'm trying to resolve it, and the customer service agent says, I'm so sorry, let me see what I can do to help you, I'm going to try my best. Like, that's a very different experience than, well, I can't help you with that. What do you expect me to do? I can't even believe you're calling me. And not that people say those things, but those behaviors get conveyed, unfortunately. And then my own behavior changes based on that interaction too. Daria, you were going to say something.
Yeah, so thinking about how personally we all take behavior, right? And we do take it personally, whether it is from our students, from our partners, from the customer service representatives, whoever it might be. I think one of the most life-changing moments has been when I was in the applied behavior analysis program, and we started talking about the function behavior and kind of figuring out, well, why is this happening? Because to me, that's a question that has really stuck, and it became a really good strategy when, in a moment when things are really escalating, to try to kind of step on the balcony, look down and say, okay, what is going on here, right? Like, what's the function of this person's behavior? What is the underlying need? And just kind of start looking rather than, oh my gosh, this kid is trying to do this or that to me, but more looking at it from the perspective of, it is obvious that the demands of the situation outweigh the behavioral skills that the student has. So, what are the demands? What is difficult about it? What skills does the child need to have instead? And how can I find ways to teach those skills, right? I think it's that removal and kind of putting on the detective hat or being able to analyze behavior from afar, going back to that science of behavior, Selena, going back to that three-term contingency. I think that's really, really powerful. And if we are really honest with ourselves, then a lot of times, to Daniel's point, we can unpack and say, oops, I'm the one who has created the antecedent that has made this chain happen, right? And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But I think that in part of our problem solving, we do have to look at our own behaviors and figure out how did they factor, if at all, into the things that we have seen in the classroom.
So to that point, I do think this is a really important question because at the end of the day, if you have a student who's engaging in interfering behavior, no matter how you reframe it, they're still engaging in interfering behavior until you intervene. So what if I have 15, 17, 23 other little kids or middle school kids, high school kids, whatever the kids may be? How do I still support that one kid while I'm still ensuring the rest of the class is getting their learning needs met?
So, and Selena, I love your optimistic 15, 16, 17 students. I'm thinking of our second year teachers who would be saying, go fish, 31, 32, 33, keep going, right? And I think that's a really big consideration. I think this is where we keep on talking about the importance of having classroom community and having spaces where we can navigate and help peers hold each other accountable to a degree in building that true sense of community. Because I think then when you have a sense of community and you have one or two students, it's a little bit easier to manage as opposed to when you're seeing that interfering behavior from quite a few students in your classroom, which in that case would be a whole other conversations about the systems piece in the classroom, right? But I think the piece is similar to our previous answers many a time is to figure out and be strategic about what is going to be the plan. How can you shape that behavior? What are the resources that you can use? How can you leverage in a positive manner the hopefully positive peer pressure? Right there, these are all the considerations, and it may look very differently whether we're talking about an elementary classroom or whether we're talking about secondary classroom. I remember when I taught in elementary school and we got a new student halfway through the year, and this friend of mine really struggled. This friend struggled because it was a new school, it was a new geographic region, he was less than thrilled to be there, and he made no qualms about letting everybody know about that. And I tried lots of different things and none of them seemed to work. All the things that I did before with my previous students, this was one that was gonna say, nope, your teacher toolbox is not big enough. Gotta keep looking, right? And I remember I finally came to my students and I said, hey folks, I need your help. I need the help helping this new student realize what kind of learning community we are. And when you see things, I just need you to remind them that this is not the way we act in the space. And within a week, and now the other part of my conversation was I asked my students, I believe what I said was, but that also means as we all love learning and as we all are reminding each other as to what kind of learning community we are, that also means there's very little room for shenanigans this week, right? We can return to previously scheduled shenanigans later on, but right now we just need to remember what are those class-wide rules and expectations? What are those community agreements that we build together? And within that week, every time the new little buddy would try to do something to kind of gain attention from others, all the other students would say, "Oh, hey bro, this is not what we do here. This is not how we act." And within a week, it was amazing how with that piece of consistency and with that piece of immediate feedback that was pretty positive. They weren't mean to this individual. Nobody raised their voice. It was just a kind of matter of fact of that's not how we roll here, right? And within a week, most of really interfering behaviors kind of subsided. And so I think a lot of times we really think about what are the resources that we have? How do we shape the behavior in a way that we are building a supportive learning environment and still providing some of pretty behavior specific feedback on how to change some of the ways we interact together.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I would add one more thing that we've been alluding to, but just to make it really clear. And I think this is really hard, what I'm about to say. But I think this is also the moment where we have to be pretty self-reflective. If you have that one kid or you have a student that you're just really struggling with, likely it is indicative of a bigger problem. And it maybe you've never experienced this before because you've had kids that work really well with you and your systems and whatever the case may be. But this kid doesn't fit in with what you've done previously. And so how can we look at the systems we have in place? How can we look at our routines and our procedures? And how can we modify what we're doing in the classroom to meet the needs? Probably not of just that one kid. It probably will benefit all of the kids in our classroom by making things more explicit, by being really clear about our expectations, by being really clear about how consequences, and I mean positive and negative consequences occur. Those kinds of things can make a classroom run a lot better. And one example I have of this happened right, as COVID was going on and all that stuff. The kids were coming into school, and because some of the routines were a little bit different as far as how we left the classroom and how we walked down the hallways and because we couldn't get within so many feet of each other, we actually had to go back to explicit teaching. So we had to explicitly teach kids, when we leave the room, you're all going to stand up on the left side of your desk, and then we're going to file out of the room like this, where before we didn't maybe have to explicitly teach some of those things. And sometimes when kids are engaging in interfering behaviors, we need to go back to that explicit teaching. And so I think being reflective on, and Daria, you brought this up, like, have I taught all of the skills that this kid actually needs to have? Because they may not have the skills that other kids have. They may not have the skills I anticipate that they need. some of those kinds of things. Daria, I think you were going to add to that.
Yeah, because Selena, I think about and I think all of those points are really, really valid. And I also think sometimes we do encounter students who have pretty significant needs, and we may need to reach out to other professionals and help us figure out how to best support them. I think about kids who come to us from with a really high number of ACEs, right? I think about kids who come to us with
Daria,
a
I'm going to interrupt you. Just keep you honest so everyone in our audience knows. Can you define ACEs real quick?
So we're talking about the history of trauma and the history of different events that the students might have encountered. And so really it's the adverse childhood experiences, right, which are the potentially traumatic events that students or adults had encountered. And so I think that to that point, with the trauma background, a lot of times what we know and what we do is not an actual match for a particular student. So I think sometimes we have to really collaborate with others, and sometimes we have to reach out to other professionals and figure out how do the previous learning histories, how do they shape the student's experience, and how do we change it? Because what might be appropriate for one child will look very different for a particular child under different circumstances, right? So,
And can I interrupt you for 1 second just to
sure.
add to that? That's also why sometimes kids do really well with one teacher, but struggle with another. And so I think to your point, this is a great opportunity to reach out across the hall and say, I know you had so and so last year. What worked? What didn't work? Or, oh, I know you've worked with kids that seem to have this kind of behavior before. Like, can you help me figure this out? Because it could simply be just a difference in teaching styles. There could be something really minor you could tweak, but looking for those resources of other people and their ideas, I think can be really helpful. Just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, and I think, putting a plug in, reach out to your behavior analyst or your behavior specialist in the school or in the division. Reach out to a school counselor, reach out to a school psychologist, right? I mean, reach out to all the professionals who might bring a different perspective, because I think a lot of times we get so hyper focused on a particular behavior or this specific thing that we need to shape that sometimes we forget the depth of the human experience. So it was just kind of a caveat of saying, even when you have taught the rules explicitly, even when you have established the community and this isn't clicking, sometimes there really are really intensive needs that the students have, and it's okay to reach out for help, and it's okay to reach out for assistance, and it's okay to remember that just because something is an evidence-based strategy may or may not be the best match for your specific context for that particular student.
And I think, Daria, you mentioned all those people and some of the schools I've worked in. The connection to the community is such a strong piece of that because there is, especially as kids are moving into middle school and into high school, so much of their lives is not school. So much of their reinforcement is coming from elsewhere, from peers, from people in the community, from people at their job, from people, whatever sort of that you sort of mentioned the depth and complexity of the human experience. Yeah, it's all of that. And it may be trauma, but it may also be that reinforcement history. And so really thinking about pulling people from the community in and see I've seen really strong sort of school wide and even individual student focused teams that do involve people that are in the community that are part of their church community or live nearby that can really provide perspective on what's happening, why we might be seeing some of these challenging behaviors or those things that are motivating the student and that kind of thing. And so I think casting that wide net and really thinking about this student's life is well beyond the school and will continue to be well beyond sort of the school environment. So who are those players that need to be part of this to make it meaningful and yeah, meaningful for the kid.
Well, and as Selena mentioned, right, like go talk to a teacher across the hall, talk to a teacher who had them before. I think it's really important for us to remember to take a moment to put our professional pride aside for a second and look for the people that the student is connected with, whoever they might be, whether they're in the community, in the school community, in the family, friends, wherever we can find them. We need to continue to look for them. And those are the voices we should probably listen to, because I really, really worry about our kiddos who are disconnected. I really, really worry about the kids that don't have a strong positive relationship with somebody. As I said, before, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea. You're going to have kids that you're going to naturally click with, and you're going to have kids that you're going to have to work a little bit harder to click with, and you're going to have some kids that you're going to have to work really, really hard to click with, and that's okay. But I think it's important to, when you are having a student who's experiencing so many challenges, I think it's important to, yes, reflect on what you're doing, and also look for the spots where the student is not experiencing challenges and figure out what is different in those spaces. And if you happen to find that this is a common experience for the student across the different classroom subject areas, any of those pieces, I think then that becomes a whole other concern as to how do you support a student who is truly disconnected.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good place for us to kind of put some wrap up thoughts on this. Some of the things that I was thinking about that we've talked about are, we really need to remember our own behavior and our own skills, and how can we build our skills, and how can we monitor our own behavior, because behavior feels really personal. And if we can separate that personal component, we can be a little more scientific in our methods. And I think that helps the student, it helps us, it helps everybody involved. I kind of want to end our main portion with this. I really think that something that we need to remember is that while there's always that one kid, and I truly am using air quotes, we need to remember, as both Daria and Daniel described as we started the episode today, that one kid who we experience those struggles with, who we have to work harder, who we have to be more creative in our problem solving approaches, they can truly become some of our most endearing students that stick with us for our careers and for the rest of our lives. And so I think every kid has the possibility of turning into one of our favorite students that sticks with us, no matter where we start with them. So thank you for kind of thinking through some of this with us today. I think that there's been some really good thinking points, and I hope our listeners can take away some of those thoughts. As we always do, I want to wrap up with our resource sharing. These are our unsponsored ads of resources that we think are cool, interesting, useful, helpful, that we just want to share so that people can have access to them as well. So Daniel, you are doing our resource sharing today.
Yeah, I'm happy to share this resource. It comes from the VCU RRTC Autism Center for Education, and it's a fact sheet, and it's entitled Collaborative Conversations Talking About Interfering Behavior. We put this together because I think a lot of us, and we could probably share this experience, as we've been in meetings to support kids who do have interfering behavior. Sometimes the language that gets used in those meetings can have detrimental effects toward student progress, toward the relationship with families, toward the student themselves. And so it's really important to think about and be very mindful of the words we're using and how we're talking about interfering behavior. And so this fact sheet, I think, could be used for a number of reasons. And I think in a variety of ways, let me put it that way. It really focuses on a lot of what we talked about today, really making sure we're focused on student progress and their well-being, building partnerships with those people that are important in the students' lives, the parents, community members, family, whatever, other teachers, making sure we're being objective and accurate in how we're describing behavior, prioritizing those behaviors with the student, with the parents, communicating progress, communicating the process of behavior change, right? I think a lot of times, and I meant to bring this up earlier, behavior change isn't immediate most of the time, right? And so we really have to talk about and be open with and describe that this is a process, and it's not a perfect situation. It never is. There's always a process. We're always striving for growth. And so using words that signal that to the people that are involved, and recognize that the behavior is not personal and it doesn't define the student. And so I think there's a couple of ways you could use this. One is just for your own reminder. I think two, when we're going into what can often feel like a contentious meeting, or having those uncomfortable conversations, it might be a really good tool to set for your school team, or even the student planning team, that this is how we're going to do this. And then at the end of the meeting, you can check those norms and say, were we respectful of the student's privacy? Or, did we stay focused on progress and their well-being? Do we feel like we communicated clearly? And getting feedback from the parents about those things, just to really make sure that there's transparency, and that we're communicating that this is a difficult conversation. This is a difficult topic to talk about, but we're here to support, and we want to make sure that you're getting the support you need. So sharing with teachers, sharing with administrators who might be kind of leading some of these challenging meetings, sharing with IAs who may be meeting parents at the car, right? And talking about how the day went, gives us the opportunity to sort of set some of those expectations and be able to reinforce those expectations among the people we work with, so that we really are kind of that community that's focused on growth and focused on the student, and helping the student improve and grow.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate that. And that fact sheet will be linked in the show notes. Just to wrap up one more time, I really do think that every student has potential to do really great things, and we really have the opportunity to be able to unlock that. And so the more we can do to really think through how can we support the student, and then to reach out when we do need that help. Like, that's what those other professionals are there for. So I encourage you to consider that. I hope that you have enjoyed listening to today's episode. Daria, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Daniel, as always, thank you for your perspective.
As always, thanks for having me.
And Emily, thank you for keeping us on track behind the scenes.
Thanks, everybody.
And to our listeners, we will hope you join us on the next episode. And if you have any questions, suggestions, as always, please reach out to us at cebis@odu.edu. That's CEBIS@odu.edu.
Thanks for listening to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can join the conversation by emailing us at cebis@odu.edu, visiting www.cebisva.org, or following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky at CebisVA. Special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for their support of this project.